Hi, I'm Molly, a compulsive eater. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day off the gray sheet, commit them to my sponsor in my food diary or another qualified person if my sponsor's not available. I eat them no matter what. In between, I don't eat no matter what. Abstinence is the most important thing I choose to do today. It's the door to the rest of my life. By the grace of my higher power in this program, I've been abstinent since January 7th of 2002. I grew up in a family of compulsive eaters. Food was everywhere all the time. There were big parties the night before diets. I grew up in a family of musicians and teachers, and it was a funny, loving, crazy, passionate way to grow up with lots of friends and people around all the time, and parents who cared about lots of other people, not just us, but they did care about us, and everything wasn't fun. Daddy would get very frustrated and rage sometimes, and I remember spending too many Saturdays cleaning the house, poor me, but there was nothing drastically horrible. When I figured out I was a compulsive eater, I used to kind of want to apologize for it because I wasn't sure my life was bad enough that I should have this kind of a problem. But I grew up around food and compulsive eaters, and there were alcoholics in the extended family. And I kind of always felt like I was on the outside looking in because I didn't have a weight problem. I didn't have a food problem that I was aware of. I liked vegetables, and I liked dessert, but it wasn't the end-all, be-all of my existence. And I was almost always the last one finished eating, not because I ate a lot, but because I ate slow. And I know I don't sound like a compulsive eater if I talk about my childhood, but there were moments that I have looked at through the years, and one of them was when I was in high school. I was babysitting, and there was a dessert in a jar, and I was offered one, and I had one, and then they left, and I had 3, and then I had 10, and then by the time they got home, there was like an inch in the bottom of the jar just because I couldn't leave it totally empty. And I remember that's the first time I remember really feeling ashamed and embarrassed that in regards to food. Since then, I've done a lot of things that have made me ashamed and embarrassed. Other people shamed me, and I shamed myself. And I remember, I don't think I've ever told this outside because it took me outside of myself, except maybe to a friend or two, because it took me so long not to feel ashamed about it because I sort of felt set up. But I was working at a restaurant, and somebody had a hamburger, and they were talking about how delicious it was, and I asked them if I could have a bite, and the way they looked at me, I thought they were saying yes, but apparently they were saying no. And I took a bite of their hamburger, and then they just went ballistic, and all the people behind the counter that were cooking, were mad and shaming me, and I was mortified, and it was just another way that I felt outside of the loop of the rest of the world. It seemed like I grew up feeling that way. My family was very smart and very funny, and I always felt less than. So I decided to try to be very good because I wasn't going to be that pretty, I wasn't going to be that smart, I wasn't going to be that funny, so maybe I could be that good. So, and looking back on it, I don't really think that anybody intended to make me feel that way, although they did roll their eyes at me fairly often for doing stupid things, which contributed to my not feeling smart. But it didn't make me eat out of control, except for that one time that I remember. I do remember thinking about food a lot, and I remember my little sister being very upset and me wanting to comfort her. So I grabbed something off the counter that was food, and I just started stuffing it in her mouth, and until she wasn't crying anymore. She was laughing, And I guess there's a lot of symbolism in that for me because I was taught to deal with things with food. I got into high school and got very religious, and I don't agree with that religion anymore. And it's not the concept I don't agree with. It's it was my own perception of people were going to suffer, and they deserved to because they didn't believe the right things. And that's a really black and white philosophy. Now that I'm grown, I understand that I can't snap my fingers and believe a certain thing. And so, but at the time that I was compulsing on religion really strongly, I was not taking drugs, having sex, binging, all those other things that I could have been doing and might have been doing had I not had something to compulse on, because I am a compulsive person. And in my house growing up, I had a lady down the street that would bake me things, and I would put those things under my bed because I wanted to have them for several days, and if I left them out, they would be gone in 10 minutes because I lived in a family of compulsive eaters. So I hid things under my bed, not so I would eat them, but to keep other people from eating them. And I would put my name on my dessert because I could never eat it at mealtime, and it would always be gone. And interestingly enough, I grew up to be the person that I was so indignant about as a child. And so when I got older and I did things that I didn't feel like the God of my understanding at the time could forgive, in college I had an affair with a woman, and in southern Mississippi in the 70s, you just didn't do that. I was going to burn for that for sure. And I felt so ashamed about that, and I just didn't feel like my God could love me through that. And so then I felt very lost because there was no place for me to turn. And that's where I remember turning to food. And once I turned to food, I went from eating my meals in probably 50 minutes, an hour, longer, to eating them in 5 or 10, and then eating another meal and another meal. Whenever I could get food, because I was in college and I had to go to classes, but and the amount of food I could eat was really extreme, and if I got too full and sick, I could just wait 5 minutes and I could eat some more. So I gained a lot of weight in a hurry, and I kept my weight for a long time until I never was huge numbers, because I could always kind of white knuckle myself after a certain point. So anyway, I'm telling you all of that. I hid in a closet. I ate all the food in the house, especially the sweets. Didn't share very well. Ate things I didn't want to eat. Couldn't stop eating them. Felt mortified. Then later I got to where I would promise myself I wasn't going to eat. 5 minutes later I'd be eating, and every day I was breaking promises to myself. And my self-esteem wasn't the best to begin with, but every day it was getting worse and worse and worse. And I was feeling very, very miserable. And I'm paraphrasing because I want to get to what life is like now, because that's what's really important. I just need to qualify. Trust me, I was and am a compulsive eater. Food made me miserable. It didn't matter if I was eating it wishing I wasn't, or not eating it wishing I was. And so the rest of my life had kind of turned around. I found a higher power that I loved and that worked for me, that was positive and open. And I found friends, and I found a man. I had been married twice. The second time after that, I actually met him in a compulsive eating program. And after that turned out to be a really bad idea, I didn't get married for a really long time. But then I had a church and a job and a son and a life that I cared about, and I met a man that I cared about a lot, and everything was great except that I couldn't stop eating. So I started looking for another compulsive eater program. I thought I'd go back to the first one and just maybe a sponsor would sponsor me on some kind of food plan, because I knew I had to have a boundary. I had to have things that were yeses and things that were no, and I had to know how much I could eat of them and all of that. So I looked for a meeting, and I came to it, and it just turned out to be a gray sheet meeting. And when I got there, they didn't have any, we were at a Starbucks, and they didn't have any trouble finding me, but I would never have found them because there wasn't anybody that in that meeting that looked like they needed a meeting except for the other new person and me. And they all looked normal size. I had never been into a compulsive eating program where the majority of the people there looked normal sized. So that was kind of a shocker, but a good shocker. And then the person started talking, and she sounded like me when she told the first part of her story. She sounded as much ashamed of her food, and it sounded like it caused her at least as much angst as mine had caused mine. And then she said when the person talked to her, she was at a point of desperation. There was nothing she wasn't willing to do, and I was in that place. And then she said that she had had neutrality. I don't remember that word being used around food ever until that day. Neutrality around her food. And I thought that was something that I had to try, and that was 16 and some odd years ago. And I remember that at the time, I sat across the table at lunch from a lady who ate a dessert, and it was a dessert that came in 2 pieces. And she would eat one piece, and she would put the other piece in her purse. And then maybe the next day, she'd pull it back out at lunch, or 3 days later, or maybe never. And I thought that was the strangest thing I had ever seen. There was nobody in my life that ever only ate half of any kind of a sweet something. And I'm saying that because I got abstinent and I got neutrality around my food about a month later, because I walked into a room full of food that somebody else had made for us as teachers, and I just remember thinking how nice it was that they had gone to all that trouble. And then it hit me. That's what neutrality feels like. I don't want that food. I don't care about the food. I only care about the love behind it. I'm not scared I'm going to eat it. I don't feel sorry for myself that I'm not going to eat it. I feel grateful that I have protection and that I don't care about it. And that's the first time I remember having neutrality. It felt like a miracle to me. It still feels like a miracle to me. But the reason I said that about the other is because years later, inside abstinence, my son asked me for something. I think I had a gift card somebody had given me or something, and I was going to give it to him because I didn't eat at that restaurant. And I was fishing through my purse, and I pulled out a giant, one of those brown giant bar things. I pulled it out of my purse and laid it on the table. And my son, who had watched me be abstinent since he was 11, freaked out and said, "Mom, why do you have that in your purse?" And I said, "Why don't you tell me why I have it in my purse?" And he said, "Some band kid was coming around selling it and you couldn't say no." And I said, "That's exactly right." But I didn't even remember that it was there. And I remembered years before when I thought that lady was so crazy that she had that in her purse. And it had been in my purse. I've been lugging it around for weeks and had no idea it was in there. So that is neutrality around my food. Now I want to get to what life is like today. I have ridden the MS 150. It was a long time ago, but I rode it abstinently with my husband before we got married on a tandem bicycle. And I have been on cruises, and I have lost my best friend and my father, and I have been married. I got married. We had an abstinent dinner for the wedding celebration. I watched my son get married. And now the biggest no matter what that I'm facing is that my husband is dying of cancer. Nobody's telling me that he's not going to. And it's really painful because I've been in relationships that weren't like this one. And this is the one I want to be in. And he's loving and kind and all the things I want to be with the rest of my life. And we just retired last year. And I thought we were going to get to spend all this lovely time together. And now, I'm making sure that I have bags he can throw up in my purse and his extra medicine in my purse, and my scale, my measuring cup, my tablespoon are always in my purse. And yesterday, he's going to actually have a biopsy to see if he qualifies for this clinical trial. It's kind of a last-ditch effort. He's on his last medicine before hospice. And so he's going to have this biopsy, and I called my son to tell him that I thought everything would be fine on Monday, but I just wanted him to be available by phone because if the worst-case scenario happened and he didn't wake up, I needed him there. My son is 28. I needed him there, and I needed him to drive me home. And I said, nobody else will do because, you're the one I lean on when I don't lean on Bruce. And he said, Mom, I'm there. And I said, and you know how to weigh and measure my food if I can't make myself, if I'm not rational enough to be abstinent. And he said, Mom, I got you. I know. She said, the only thing you have to do is you have to write down your weights and measurements now because they've changed a little since you're on maintenance. But my husband is dying of cancer. He's going to have a biopsy, and I'm making sure if the shit totally hits the fan that I can stay abstinent because I have to be here through this, present and feel it, and I can't do it if I'm not abstinent because I have to have neutrality around my food to function. I cannot be worried about when I'm going to eat or get where I don't want to eat at all and refuse to eat. I can't do those things and stay sane. And he deserves for me to be sane. And the rest of the people that are so worried about me going through this deserve for me to be sane. And I deserve for me to be sane. And abstinence keeps me sane. So, I don't eat no matter what for today. Because that's the door to the rest of my life. Thank you.
Thank you, Mom.